the state that owned the womb, the brutal breeding practices in Sparta to create perfect warriors. They did not ask her if she was ready. They did not ask her if she wanted this child. In Sparta, the state decided before the mother ever could, and sometimes it decided the child should never exist at all. The first sound was not a cry of celebration. It was the scrape of sandals on stone. In a torch-lit chamber that smelled of smoke and cold marble, a woman lay exhausted, her body still shaking from birth, while hands that were not hers reached for the newborn. There was no moment of tenderness, no time to count fingers or whisper a name, because in Sparta, a baby was not yet a person. It was only a possibility, and possibilities had to be tested. Outside, the city slept behind heavy walls. But inside these halls, a ritual older than memory was beginning again, a ritual that decided who would be allowed to live in the most feared warrior state on earth. Sparta was not like other Greek cities. It did not believe it survived because of gods or walls or clever speeches. It believed it survived because it was harder, colder, and more ruthless than everyone else. The Spartans were few, surrounded by enemies and by the helots they had enslaved, people who outnumbered them many times over and waited for any sign of weakness. Fear was not an emotion in Sparta. It was a constant presence, and over generations that fear turned into a philosophy. The individual did not matter, only the strength of the state did. From this belief came a terrifying conclusion. If the future of Sparta depended on strong warriors, then Sparta had to control not only how men fought, but how they were born. Here, even the most private parts of life belonged to the state. Marriage was not about love. It was about results. Old magistrates, men who had spent their lives watching others die, judged young bodies like tools, measuring height, shoulders, hips, and family bloodlines with the same cold attention used for weapons. A man was chosen because he looked like he could produce strong sons. A woman was chosen because her body looked like it could survive and endure. Desire did not matter. Feelings did not matter. The body was no longer personal property. It was state equipment. Spartan girls were trained from childhood not to dream of homes or gentle lives, but to become strong enough to give birth to soldiers. They ran, they wrestled, they hardened their bodies, and they were told that their battlefield was the birthing bed. A woman's value was counted in the strength of the children she could produce. If she failed, she had failed Sparta itself. And sometimes even marriage meant nothing. If a household could not produce strong children, or if another man was judged superior, the state could encourage a different pairing. This was not called betrayal. It was called duty. Even the womb could be reassigned in the service of the city. But all of this preparation led to one moment that revealed the true heart of Sparta, the inspection. When a child was born, it was not welcomed. It was taken, carried away from the mother, to a place where a council of elders waited, men who had watched friends die and learned long ago not to trust mercy. In silence, under flickering torchlight, the newborn was examined. The legs, the back, the cry, the shape of the body, everything was judged. The baby did not know it, but this was its first and most important trial. To the Spartans, this was not cruelty, it was survival. A weak child, they believed, was not just a burden. It was a future disaster. Because in their world, mercy today could mean slaughter tomorrow. The elders did not argue. They did not debate. They decided. Some infants were returned, not to be loved, but to be raised for the state. Others were carried away, wrapped in cloth, their fate never spoken of in the open. The mothers learned not to ask. In Sparta, questions were dangerous. And far from the city, beyond the walls and the training grounds, there was a place of rock and wind where unwanted answers were left behind. A place where some newborns were taken and never brought back. The judgment of newborns, they called it a test. They called it necessity. But for some children, Sparta's first lesson was that life itself was a privilege that could be taken away in silence. What happened next was never written for mothers to read. The walk was always quiet. A Spartan elder would carry the wrapped infant through stone corridors that smelled of smoke and cold, past walls that had seen generations of boys leave and never return as men. The mother did not follow. She was not meant to. In Sparta, a woman was taught from childhood that her child did not truly belong to her, and the moment of birth was also the moment of surrender. Somewhere behind her, the city continued its routines, soldiers trained, children ran, orders were shouted, and life went on as if nothing unusual was happening, because in Sparta, this ritual was not unusual at all. It was as normal as sharpening a spear. The council that waited for the newborn was called the Gerousia, a group of aged warriors whose bodies were scarred and whose eyes had learned to look at life without softness. These men had survived battles, famines, and betrayals. They believed they understood the price of weakness better than anyone. In the flickering light of torches, they unwrapped the child and placed it on a cold surface. No prayers were spoken. No blessings were given. The baby was not a miracle. It was an object of inspection. They checked the spine, the legs, the arms, the chest. They listened to the cry, not with sympathy, but with calculation. A strong cry meant strong lungs. A weak one meant trouble. Any visible deformity, any sign of frailty, any hint that this body might not endure hunger, cold, and war was noted. To us, this feels like madness. To them, it felt like responsibility. Sparta was a small state surrounded by enemies and by the helots they had enslaved, people who outnumbered them many times over. In their minds, one weak soldier in the future could cost hundreds of lives. One weak child today could mean a broken shield wall tomorrow. If the elders approved, the child was returned. But even then, it was not returned as a son or daughter. It was returned as future property of the state. The parents were allowed to raise it, but only until the state came to claim it. Love was tolerated, but only briefly. If the elders did not approve, the decision was final. There was no appeal, no second chance, no argument that could be made. The child was not executed in the hall. Sparta did not like the sight of blood in its rituals. Instead, the infant was wrapped again and carried away. Officially, they said they were returning it to nature. In reality, they were erasing it. The place they took these children to was called the apothete, the place of rejection, a barren area near the slopes of Mount Taygetus. It was a land of rock, wind, and silence. No markers showed where bodies had been left. No names were carved. The act was meant to be invisible, almost clean. The baby was placed there and left to cold, hunger, and the wild. There was no ceremony. No one stayed to watch. In the logic of Sparta, this was not murder. It was correction. Mothers knew this could happen, and that was part of the cruelty. From the moment they felt a child move inside them, they also knew that the same state that demanded this birth could later decide it was a mistake. And yet they were taught not to protest, because protest itself was a kind of weakness. A Spartan woman was expected to accept the decision with silence, even if it broke her. This system did something terrible to the human heart. It taught people to measure life not by feeling, but by usefulness. It taught them to believe that compassion was dangerous. Over time, generations grew up in a world where death could come not as punishment, but as policy. But passing the elders' inspection did not mean safety. It only meant the child had been accepted into a machine that would slowly strip away everything soft and human. Because soon, the state would come again. And when it did, it would not come to test the body anymore. It would come to take the child's soul. When marriage meant nothing in Sparta, a man did not truly own his wife, and a mother did not truly own her child. Here, even loyalty could be rewritten by law, and even the womb could be reassigned by order. What the state wanted was not love, but better blood. If the inspection decided whether a child could live, the system that came before decided what kind of child could be born at all. And this is where Sparta's cruelty became quieter, colder, and in some ways even more disturbing. In most societies, marriage was a private bond, shaped by family, emotion, or tradition. But in Sparta, it was a public tool, a method for producing bodies that the state could later turn into weapons. A Spartan did not marry because his heart chose. He married because the state expected results, and those results were measured not in happiness, but in strength. Old magistrates watched the young the way craftsmen watched raw materials. They remembered bloodlines, counted victories, and studied bodies with the same seriousness used to inspect armor before a campaign. A tall, powerful man from a respected family was valuable. A woman with a strong frame, endurance, and the look of health was valuable. They were paired not because they fit together, but because the state believed their bodies might produce something useful. Romance was not forbidden. It was simply ignored, because in Sparta, feelings were considered unreliable, and the future of the state could not be left to chance. For women, this meant a life defined almost entirely by expectation. From childhood, Spartan girls were trained to run, to wrestle, to strengthen their bodies, not so they could fight, but so they could endure childbirth and produce strong sons. They were taught that their greatest honor was not to be loved, but to be useful. A woman who produced healthy boys was praised. A woman who did not was pitied, and sometimes quietly blamed. Motherhood in Sparta was not a gentle role. It was a duty, and duties did not care about feelings. But the system did not stop at arranged marriage. Sparta's obsession with perfect bloodlines went further, into a territory where the idea of a husband or wife almost lost its meaning. If a respected warrior's household failed to produce strong children, or if a man was judged too old or too weak, the state did not see this as a personal tragedy. It saw it as an inefficiency. In such cases, another man, stronger and more suitable, could be encouraged to father a child with that household's wife. This was not done in secret. It was not considered shameful. It was considered practical. To modern eyes, this looks like betrayal. To Sparta, it was civic duty. The goal was not to protect marriages. The goal was to improve the blood of the city. A woman's womb was not her private world. It was a resource, and resources could be reassigned when needed. Even the husband was expected to accept this, because refusing would mean placing personal pride above the needs of Sparta, and that was one of the greatest sins in their culture. In this way, the most intimate part of human life became political. The bedroom became another kind of training ground. The body became another piece of state property. Over time, this did something subtle and terrible to the people of Sparta. It taught them to separate emotion from action. It taught them that love was a luxury, and that loyalty belonged only to the state. Men did not even live full lives with their wives. From the age of 7, boys were taken into communal training, and even when they became adults and were allowed to marry, they still slept in the barracks. A husband would sneak out at night to visit his wife, quietly, briefly, and return before dawn. There was no shared household, no daily family life, no slow building of affection. The union existed for one purpose: conception. Once that was achieved, the man returned to his true home, the army. The state did not hide what it was doing. It punished men who refused to marry or refused to produce children. Those who stayed single too long were publicly humiliated during festivals, forced to walk through the cold streets and sing songs about their failure. They were treated as if they had betrayed the city, because in Sparta, refusing to reproduce was seen as refusing to serve. And so, generation after generation, children were not born from love, but from obligation. Families were not built. They were assembled. But even this cold, controlled system was only the beginning. Because no matter how carefully Sparta planned a birth, no matter how perfectly 2 bodies were chosen, the final judgment still came after the child was born. And that judgment did not happen in a bedroom or a home. It happened in silence, under torchlight, in the hands of men who believed they had the right to decide who deserved to exist. The theft that built predators. At 7 years old, a Spartan child stopped being a son and became raw material. Hunger was not a problem to solve. It was a lesson to learn. And pain was not a punishment. It was a language the state used to speak to the soul. The day the state came for the child was never described as a kidnapping, because in Sparta it was considered a return of property. At 7 years old, a boy who had passed the elder's inspection was taken from his mother and delivered to the agoge, the great training system that did not exist to educate, but to transform. There were no tears allowed in the official story, no lingering goodbyes, no promises of coming home soon. The child was expected to walk away without looking back, because the first lesson of Sparta was simple and cruel. Attachment is weakness. The barracks became his new world. Stone floors, cold air, and rows of other boys who were just as afraid, but had already learned to hide it. From the first night, comfort was treated like an enemy. The boys did not sleep on beds. They were ordered to make their own from reeds torn by hand from the riverbanks, without knives, without tools, their fingers bleeding as they worked. They were given one rough tunic for the entire year, summer and winter alike. No shoes, no blankets. The message was clear. The body must learn to endure before the mind is even allowed to complain. But the most carefully designed cruelty was hunger. The rations were not small by accident. They were calculated. Always enough to keep the boys alive, never enough to make them full. The constant ache in the stomach was not a mistake in the system. It was the system. The instructors wanted the boys to feel it, to think about it, to be shaped by it. Hunger made them restless. Hunger made them alert. Hunger made them desperate. And then came the second lesson. They were encouraged to steal. In most societies, theft is a crime. In Sparta, it was training. The boys were told to find food wherever they could, from storehouses, from travelers, sometimes even from temples. They learned to move silently, to watch, to wait, to slip through shadows like animals. The goal was not just to eat. The goal was to become invisible. A warrior who could not sneak into enemy territory and take what he needed was, in the Spartan mind, already half dead. But this lesson came with a trap hidden inside it. If a boy was caught stealing, the punishment was not light. He was whipped, sometimes until he collapsed. Not because he stole, because he was clumsy enough to be seen. The crime was not dishonesty. The crime was failure. Slowly, this burned a dangerous idea into young minds. Success makes everything acceptable, and being caught is the only real sin. The days were filled with physical trials, running, wrestling, endurance tests that left bodies bruised and bleeding, but the nights were often worse. The boys slept lightly, always cold, always hungry, always watched. Older boys were encouraged to dominate younger ones, to test them, to break them. The instructors did not stop this. They observed it. They wanted to see who would submit, who would resist, and who would learn to hide their fear behind silence. Words themselves became dangerous. The boys were trained to speak little, to answer briefly, to never explain themselves. Our word laconic comes from this place for a reason. In Sparta, speech was not meant to express thoughts. It was meant to obey. A foolish question could earn punishment. A clever, short answer could earn respect. Slowly, conversation died and calculation took its place. This was not education. It was erasure. The state was not trying to build strong bodies alone. It was trying to empty the child of everything soft. Compassion, hesitation, the need for approval, the memory of home. All of it was treated like weakness that had to be burned away. The boys were taught to watch each other, to compete, to survive at each other's expense. Brotherhood existed, but it was a hard brotherhood, built from shared suffering and constant rivalry. And somewhere in this process, something changed. The child who had once been carried into the world and judged by elders slowly disappeared. In his place, a different creature began to form. Quieter, colder, more alert. A creature that measured every situation in terms of advantage and risk. But hunger and cold were only the opening tools. Because soon, Sparta would introduce a lesson that did not test the body at all. It would test whether the boy could live with what he was about to become. The war against the human soul, Sparta, had already taught the boy to endure pain and hunger. Now it would teach him something far worse. Not how to survive, not how to fight, but how to cross a line he could never return from. This was the lesson that did not scar the body. It erased the person. By the time a Spartan boy reached this stage of training, the city no longer saw him as a child. He was a tool that still needed final sharpening. The agoge had stripped away comfort, taught him to steal, taught him to stay silent, taught him to fear failure more than wounds. But Sparta knew something dangerous still lived inside him. A hesitation, a memory of being human. And so the state prepared a lesson that would not be written down, not celebrated, and not spoken of openly, a lesson that existed only in whispers, and in the way certain young men returned with colder eyes. They called it the cryptia. The boys were not told the truth at first. They were told they had been chosen for a special duty, an honor reserved for the most disciplined and the most quiet. They were taken away from the barracks at night and given almost nothing, a knife, a little food, and a simple order: move unseen, survive, and do not be noticed. Officially, it was described as a test of endurance and stealth. Unofficially, everyone in Sparta knew what it really was. The Helots had always been the shadow hanging over the city. They worked the fields, carried the loads, and outnumbered the Spartans many times over. Sparta lived in constant fear that one day these people would rise and tear the city apart. So fear was turned into a weapon. Every year, Sparta declared ritual war on the Helots. Not a real war, but a legal excuse. An excuse that meant killing them was no longer a crime. The boys sent into the countryside during the cryptia learned very quickly what was expected of them. They were told to watch the roads, to hide in ditches and fields, to listen at night. And when they saw a Helot who looked strong, confident, or capable of leading others, they were told to act. Not in open battle, not with witnesses, quietly, cleanly, and then disappear again. This was not training in fighting. This was training in becoming something else. The first time is always the most important. The first time the boy raises his hand and knows that what he is about to do cannot be undone. There are no cheers, no commands shouted, no comrades beside him, only breathing in the dark and the sound of his own heart. And then, after, there is silence. A silence that does not leave him when he walks away. Sparta understood something terrible about the human mind. Once a person has crossed a certain line, once he has done something that cannot be justified as accident or necessity, the world changes shape. People stop being people. They become risks or obstacles or shadows. The city did not want soldiers who only obeyed orders. It wanted men who no longer needed to ask themselves whether something was right. When the boys returned, no one asked them what they had done. That was part of the test. They were expected to carry it alone, to lock it away, to let it harden inside them. This is how Sparta taught them to divide themselves. The outside face remained calm. The inside slowly emptied. From that point on, fear worked differently. They were no longer afraid of pain. They were afraid of being weak. They were afraid of hesitating. They were afraid of being the kind of person they used to be. This is what Sparta was truly building. Not just warriors, but men who could be sent anywhere and told to do anything, and who would not stop to question the cost. By now, the boy no longer remembered his mother's voice. He barely remembered his own childhood. The barracks, the drills, the cold nights, and the silent duties had replaced everything else. He did not think in terms of right or wrong. He thought in terms of orders and results. And this was exactly what the state wanted. Because a man who is killed in silence and lived with it is easier to control than a man who still believes he has a choice. But even this was not the end. Soon, these boys would no longer be tested in shadows or sent out alone. Soon, they would be placed in a line, shield to shield, and told to prove that everything they had lost was worth it. And only then would Sparta see what kind of monsters it had truly created. The price of perfection. They were no longer boys, and they were no longer entirely men. They stood in lines of bronze and iron, carrying not just shields, but everything that had been taken from them. This was the moment Sparta finally revealed what all that suffering had been for. When the Spartan youth finally left the shadows of training and secret trials, he did not step into freedom. He stepped into formation. The battlefield was not a place of chaos for him. It was the final classroom, the place where every lesson of hunger, silence, obedience, and fear was meant to come together. He took his place in the phalanx, shield pressed against the shield of the man beside him, spear angled forward, eyes fixed ahead. In this line, there was no room for doubt, no room for individuality, and no room for mercy. Each man was only a part of a larger body, and that body moved as one. To the enemies of Sparta, this wall of bronze and discipline looked like something almost unnatural. They saw men who did not break formation, who did not chase glory, who did not panic when arrows fell, or when friends collapsed beside them. The Spartan did not fight as an individual hero. He fought as a piece of a machine. Step forward. Hold the line. Do not retreat. These were not suggestions. They were the only way he knew how to exist. In battle, the results were terrifyingly effective. Smaller Spartan forces defeated larger armies. The shield wall advanced like a moving cliff. To the outside world, it looked like proof that Sparta's system was right, that all the cruelty, all the coldness, all the sacrifices had created something unbeatable. Songs were written, stories were told. The legend of the perfect warrior spread across Greece. But legends are built from distance. They hide what is close. Inside the armor, inside the silence, the Spartan soldier was not a hero in the way other cultures imagined heroes. He did not dream of home because he barely remembered what home was. He did not dream of a future because his entire life had been planned for him before he was born. He knew how to obey, how to endure, how to stand and not move. But he did not know how to choose. Many of these men would never live in a real household until they were 30. Even then, the army remained their true family. The state always came first. A Spartan mother was praised not for keeping her son alive, but for losing him well. Return with your shield or on it, they said, and this was not poetry. It was policy. A man who ran was not just a coward. He was a traitor to the entire system. And so they fought, and they died, and Sparta remained feared. But something else happened quietly, over generations. The city that had built itself entirely for war slowly began to shrink. It demanded perfection, and perfection is rare. It killed its weak. It pushed its strong to exhaustion. It turned family into duty, and duty into law. Fewer true Spartan citizens were born. The machine that had once seemed unstoppable began to starve itself. Historians later noticed this strange irony. The society that tried to control life with absolute precision was slowly destroyed by that same control. By refusing to allow softness, it also refused to allow growth. By treating people as tools, it forgot how fragile tools really are. And what remains today is not just a story about ancient soldiers. It is a warning. Sparta proves that you can build a society on fear, discipline, and sacrifice. You can even make it strong for a time. But when you design human beings only for usefulness, When you decide that worth is measured only by strength, something essential disappears. You may win battles. You may build legends. But in the end, you lose something far more difficult to replace. You lose the human soul. And when that is gone, what remains may still walk, and fight, and obey. But it is no longer truly alive.